Okay, so have you ever wondered about those like really expensive digital audio cables? Like, do they actually make a difference, or is it all just hype?
Yeah, it's a debate as old as time itself.
Well, maybe not that old.
True. But it's a question a lot of audiophiles ask, and today we're doing a deep dive into some research that might shed some light on the whole thing.
Right, we're looking at this blog post from 2019 by Archimago. He's pretty well known in the audiophile community, right?
Yeah, he's got a good reputation, seems to know his stuff. And in this post, he really digs into this whole idea of bits are bits.
Bits or bits, meaning?
Basically that it doesn't matter what cable you use to transmit digital audio, the information is all the same.
Ah, okay, so like whether it's a $10 cable or a $1,000 cable.
Exactly. It's all just ones and zeros in the end.
So is Archimago saying that all these expensive cables are a scam then?
Well, not exactly. He actually goes pretty deep into the technical side of things to explain why those pricey cables might not be the magic bullet some people think they are.
Okay, so for those of us who might not be engineers or whatever, can you give us like a digital audio 101?
Sure. At its most basic, digital audio is all about transmitting information as bits, those ones and zeros.
Like a light switch. It's
Yeah.
either on or off.
Perfect analogy. One or zero, no in between. And that's actually what makes digital audio super robust.
How so?
Well, with analog signals, you have all this room for interpretation, for noise to creep in and mess with the signal.
Ah, I see.
But with digital, it's either a one or zero, no ambiguity.
So there's less chance of the signal getting degraded.
Exactly. Plus, there are all these error correction systems built in.
Mm-hmm.
Even if a few bits get flipped around during transmission, the system can usually fix it. You never even know.
So it's like when I send a file online, even if my internet connection is a bit wonky, the file usually arrives perfectly fine.
Exactly. Modern systems are designed to be super reliable, and digital audio is no exception. Archimago actually compares the noise levels from a low-powered Raspberry Pi with a power-hungry gaming PC. And you know what? The noise floor was basically identical.
So even though our computers and phones are already producing some digital noise, it's not really affecting the audio quality.
Right, and a lot of that is thanks to something called a DAC, which stands for Digital to Analog Converter.
Okay, and what does that do?
This little guy takes those digital signals, the ones and zeros, and turns them into the sound waves that we can hear. And modern DACs are amazing at filtering out noise.
Okay, so we've covered noise, but what about these other audiophile buzzwords like jitter and clock drift?
Ah, yes, the mysterious world of jitter and drift. Yeah, so jitter is basically like, imagine a drummer who's just slightly offbeat, you know.
Okay, I can kind of picture that.
You might not consciously notice it, but it can make the music feel a bit off.
Subtle, but maybe noticeable to a trained ear.
Right. And then there's clock drift, which is kind of similar, but it's more about the timing between different components in your system. Like if you have two clocks running at almost but not quite the same speed.
I feel like we're getting into like atomic clock territory here.
Yeah, it's getting pretty technical. But the point is, these variations are happening at like incredibly tiny levels. Like we're talking parts per million.
But Archimago argues that these variations are way too small for us to actually hear right.
Exactly. Modern equipment is so precise that the amount of jitter and clock drift is practically insignificant. In one test, he actually added a ton of jitter to an audio file on purpose, like way more than you'd ever experience in real life, and even then it was really hard to hear the difference.
So what you're saying is that our ears might not be as sophisticated as we think they are?
Well, it's not just about our ears, it's about our brains too. Remember how we talked about the placebo effect earlier?
Oh yeah, like when you think something will sound better so you convince yourself it does?
Exactly. And that plays a huge role in how we perceive audio. You buy an expensive cable, you expect it to sound better, and suddenly you start hearing all these differences that might not actually be there.
It's like those blind taste tests where people can't tell the difference between expensive wine and cheap wine until you tell them which one is which.
Exactly. Our brains are easily influenced by our expectations and our surroundings. Like maybe when you switched out that cable, you also subtly adjusted your speaker placement, or something else in the room changed the acoustics.
And you'd never even realize it.
Right. Our brains are great at picking up on tiny changes, but not always so great at figuring out what caused them.
Okay, so if all this stuff about jitter and clock drift is basically a non-issue, what should I be focusing on then? Like, if I want to improve my audio setup, but I don't want to get sucked into buying a bunch of overpriced cables.
It's a good question. Focus on the core components first. Your speakers, your amplifier, and your DAC. Those are the heart of your system.
So it's like buying a really nice oven, but then using cheap ingredients.
Perfect analogy. You're not going to get the best results that way.
So invest in good quality core components. And then what about cables?
Do your research. Look for objective measurements and reviews from reputable sources. Don't just believe the marketing hype.
So basically be an informed consumer.
Exactly. And remember, just because a cable is expensive doesn't mean it's actually better.
So maybe all those concerns about jitter and clock drift, were they ever a real problem, or was it always a bit overblown?
Well, it's true that technology has come a long way since the early days of digital audio. Those early CD players and DACs, they didn't have the same level of sophistication as the equipment we have today.
So jitter and clock drift might have been more of a factor back then.
Potentially, yeah. Think of it like those old tube TVs, the ones that you had to smack to get the picture to stop flickering.
Oh, yeah, I remember those.
Right. They were notorious for having all sorts of image problems.
Yeah.
But modern TVs have much better electronics, so those problems are basically non-existent now.
And it sounds like the same thing has happened with digital audio.
Exactly. As technology has advanced, engineers have found ways to minimize or even eliminate those potential issues, to the point where they're almost inaudible on most modern systems.
Okay, so then what is it about our perception of sound that makes this whole debate so fascinating? Like, if those imperfections don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, why do we even care?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's something that we're going to explore in more depth in the next part of this deep dive.
So we've gone on and on about noise, jitter, clock drift, all those audiophile things. But like you've said, on a modern setup, it's practically impossible to hear those imperfections. So, like, what's the deal? If our ears can't tell the difference, why do we even bother?
It really makes you think, huh? It's kind of like we're leaving the world of electronics and diving headfirst into, I don't know, psychology. Brains are weird, right?
Or you're saying there's more to it than just the placebo effect? I'm kind of scared to ask, but
Yeah.
what else is there?
Think about it this way, okay? Look, when you sit down to actually listen to music, you're not just like hearing sound waves or whatever. You're bringing like your whole life into it.
Right.
Your memories, what you expect to hear. Like if you buy into this idea that a certain cable will make the music warmer or, I don't know, more detailed, your brain might just fill in the blanks.
So you're saying our brains are basically like little audio wizards, making stuff up as they go.
Kinda. It's like those optical illusions, right? You think you see one thing, but your brain is playing tricks on you. Our brains are always trying to make sense of the world, and sometimes they gotta, cut corners to do it.
So maybe it's not just about the gear, but about how we use it and like what we think it's supposed to sound like. Man, this is way more complicated than I thought it would be.
For sure. And there's more. Our brains love patterns. We see connections even when they might not really be there.
Okay, so you're saying my brain is basically a conspiracy theorist looking for clues in the music.
Maybe a little bit. It's called confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Like, if you spend a bunch of money on a fancy cable, you really want to believe it makes a difference. You're going to find proof, even if it's not really there.
Yeah. Are you saying these companies are just tricking people, preying on, like, confirmation bias to sell them stuff they don't need?
It's not that simple, really. I mean, maybe some of these cables do make a teeny tiny difference.
Yeah.
But not enough that most people would actually notice if they weren't told about it. The point is, don't get so caught up in chasing perfect sound that you forget to actually enjoy the music,
It's like at the end of the day, isn't that the whole point? Connecting with the music, feeling something.
Exactly. Find music that moves you.
Yeah.
Have a space where you can just get lost in it. Invest in equipment is good. If you want to try the fancy cables, go for it. Just be smart about it. Don't believe everything you read.
Man, this has been a trip. Learned a lot today about audio, brains, the whole shebang.
Always more to learn, right?
That's the truth. And listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you ever fallen for this? Bought something? Convinced it sounded better? Or maybe you got a totally different take on all this. Head to our website. Let's talk about it. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into, well, who knows? The world of sound is a weird and wonderful place.